Hey guys, this is Chris with the Unshakable Man podcast and community for men who want to train to be their best mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually in their lives and relationships. I'm joined today with my friend Jacob from the Unshakable Man Community. Hey Jacob, welcome in, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So you have been in the community for how long? How long have you been in here? How long have we been
I
training together?
I think since around the end of 2020, like late 2020, is when I joined. So
Awesome.
going on 2 years.
2 years. 2 years of being in the Unshakable Man community together. You're just bringing me back right now
Mm-hmm.
to being in the middle of the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
being in groups on Zoom together in this time uh, when we had originally started as doing men's groups here in the city in San Francisco in person, and and I remember back then thinking like doing these groups online was gonna be something we were doing just because we needed to,
Mm-hmm.
right? But now here we are continuing to do the training together online. And I'm wondering that just like what brought you to want to join the community? What made you or brought you to this work?
That's a good question. So I had a couple of big life events that happened to me in 2019, toward the end of 2019, that really kind of started my whole journey of growth and development. And um, for like I'd say like the first half or so of 2020, a big growing edge for me was just intimacy in general. And, um, I was starting to learn more about what it actually meant. And, um,
Hmm.
but then I noticed that, I had these female friends that I felt really comfortable being intimate with in like a platonic way, but like as friends. And I remember at one point I was like, you know, I feel resistance to having this level of intimacy with male friends, and I wonder what's behind that. Um, and so, usually for me, when I discover something that I have resistance to, I begin exploring it. And
Hmm.
I mentioned this to my friend Carly, who uh, told me about. I don't remember where she heard about this, but she told me about it. So I was like, oh, I thought I'd give it a try, and then it turned out
Oh,
to
that's
be
awesome.
to be exactly what I needed. And yeah, it's I've had an on again, off again kind of participation level, but it's just really completely changed my life, and I'm a completely new, better version of myself as a result of the work that we do.
Wow, man. Wow. And when you say on again, off again, what are you referring to when you say on again, off again, like relationship with the work?
Well, with Unshakable Man in particular, like there will be uh, seasons of life where I just don't make the time and I don't prioritize it.
Hmm.
And then there's and then there's times when I'm like, like this is, I kind of get back to basics, back to like,
Hmm.
oh, I need to, just like working out, right? Like we take time off from working out sometimes. And then at some point it's like, like I feel kind of shitty. Like I need to start
Yeah.
doing this again. Which incidentally is like something that's been happening to me. And like tomorrow morning, I'm going for a long run because I've been really slacking off there. So yeah, so like I've done a couple of cohorts. Like I'll have periods where I do my regular drop in groups, and then um, there's been
Hmm.
times when just kind of slip away for a bit.
Yeah. Well, to bring in a man who maybe is listening to this when you've been doing this work for 2 years. We've gotten to know each other here by showing up in group together. And when you say like coming in and coming out, and you refer to the work, I want I wonder if we could just talk about like what your perspective is on the work, right? And what you're actually doing so that we could bring a man who's listening, guys who are listening to this into that conversation. But then also I really want to hear like what you discovered after participating in these cohorts, right? Because you've shown up, man. I mean, I will speak for myself in relationship with you. Um, like we live, I want to say like 14 miles from each other, or we
Hmm.
used to live 14 miles from each other, right? In this city and in San Francisco. And there's something about uh, that I've just seen in doing this work is that for me is that these are circles, these are containers. It's like I'm going into it
Hmm.
and I'm leaving the whirlwind of my life and I'm going into this container. And we've only actually seen each other in person like 2 times, I think, during that whole time. Maybe
Hmm.
once. I think we went for a run together.
It's been twice. We did a run in San
we
Francisco and we did a run in Oakland.
Nice. Okay, yeah, so we have done the 2 different runs, right?
Yeah.
But it's like but yet we have this depth of a relationship from practicing together, and guys on the outside, like, they literally are moving through their life just a block from me, and they don't even know that this type of work exists, right?
Hmm.
They're, like, suffering alone, dealing with frustrations and anxieties, loneliness, disconnection, maybe not even identifying as being lonely because it's
Hmm.
just how you've been for so long, right?
Oh,
And
for
you, I
sure.
think, are a special, you're a special, it's a very special thing to call me up and be like, Chris, I got something to share. This has
Hmm.
really changed my life. It's really affected me. And I don't know, yeah, I really want to like invite you to give me your perspective.
Yeah, for sure. So, um, just kind of give some broad strokes. Like, I mean, I grew up in a household that was, um, like I dealt with a lot of emotional abuse from my dad. I got spanked a lot, which I now consider physical abuse. And
Hmm.
the sort of, well, I'm going to kind of jump back and forth in timeline, right? So,
Yeah.
like something that I've recently like become really acutely aware of is just how much of that lack of safety and that anxiety and that alarm has been stored away in my body.
Hmm.
And throughout my life, it's come up in ways that were completely unconscious to me. Like I had anger issues, um, very, very reactive. Um, like I only had like really two states. Like I was either fight or like full on sympathetic activation or like okay, but I could never tolerate like some amount of discomfort. Like my window of tolerance was, here.
Yeah.
Um, and so,
Were you aware of that?
no, well, sort of. Like I knew that
Yeah.
I had kind of these two modes, right?
Right.
But I didn't know that there was anything I could do about it.
Yeah.
I
I
thought that's just the way I was.
I hear that from a lot of guys, and that they and I identify with that like not knowing, because we say this over and over, right? In group, like, I don't know what you're feeling and you don't know what I'm feeling. You're
Hmm.
the only one who can report on your experience. And at the same time, we're all deeply alone. And I think one of the things I notice is that we really don't know until until we get out of what we were in, what we
Hmm.
were in. right? And I hear that from so many guys, and I don't I and I don't think that you need to be like abused in order to have this happen, especially with
Hmm.
today's environment of just fight or flight and forcing through and striving and pushing, right? And like
Hmm.
getting in arguments with our partners and like disconnection in our relationships and like losing jobs, right? It it's really like all men.
And on top of that, the at least the way I coped with this is trying to control my external environment, right? Like if something was bothering me, I either needed to make it stop or I had to leave the situation. Like I couldn't deal with my own discomfort. Like one example, like I used to be really uptight about noise in my on my street and stuff when I'm trying to sleep, right? Like the garbage trucks in San Francisco would come down the street at 3, 4 in the morning every day when I lived in Hayes Valley, and I would be so upset. Dude, I went and found the one of the board members of Recology on LinkedIn and sent him a message on LinkedIn complaining about this situation, right? And
Wow.
oh yeah, no, this is serious.
I'm sorry to laugh. I'm sorry to laugh at that, but
It's
that's
funny
that's
now, but
that's a great example.
so and what I've learned recently about myself is that what was keeping me awake wasn't the noise. It was my anger and frustration about the noise.
Hmm.
And when I've been able to just like accept that this is what is and let go of the need to fix it and change it, most of the time I can just go right back to sleep.
Wow.
Um, and so,
And how did showing up in the community over the past 2 years attribute to that in any way?
um, well, a lot. So, um, in a way, it was very similar to how I got into running. Like, I started running when I was around 29, 30 years old. Uh,
Mhm.
and the first couple of years just, okay, so I don't want to say that being an Unshakable Man sucked, but I'm just giving this as a parallel. Like, the first couple of years of
Yeah,
running sucked. Like, it hurt. Um, I couldn't run more than like 2 miles without just feeling like I wanted to amputate my legs. Like, it was awful. Um, but over time, like doing it enough, then one day it just started feeling better. And then I ran a half marathon and it was great. And then I kept running and then I kept doing half marathons. And then at some point, I realized half marathons didn't even scare me anymore. And so I
right,
was like, all right, let me go for a full marathon. And so I trained for that
right.
and did a full marathon. But the point is that sometimes you don't like I didn't really see results in either domain right away. Like it took a year or two of showing up before things just started to really fall into place. Like I knew that Unshakable Man work was important. Like it just
Mhm.
like I could feel like, oh, this is something I need.
You could
Um,
feel it, like in a after a group or in a group.
absolutely. And the the main way that Unshakable Man, like especially in this case of noticing like the anger and the frustration at the noise, is because we slow down, we take time to just feel what's going on in our bodies and notice.
Mhm.
Um, like I've over the past 2 years, like I actually feel things that are going on in my body. Like right now, as we're speaking, I can feel sensations all throughout my torso, and I have that in my conscious
Mhm.
awareness as we're speaking. Like that is totally new for me. Um, and right now,
Can
I feel.
can
Oh,
we
go
just
ahead.
pause and appreciate that though? Right? Like, cuz that is I mean, that for me is everything,
Hmm.
right? The in that, I mean, in group, we talk about how that is called interoception, right? Like the physical ability to feel into the body. And when just relating to, I love that. I love your example of the trash, right? Because your smile on your face when you said it, and it was like, it's a perfect example for me of something frivolous and also uh horrible. Like it's like
Hmm.
your tormentor, right? And
Hmm.
in group, we talk about how our partners are our tormentors. They're helping us
Hmm.
find the places inside that need our care and attention. And when, as young men, right, like we've survived to get to where we are, to where we could find this work. We're so used to you went so far outside of yourself to go to LinkedIn and to find a board member, right? To say, stop making me feel what I can't feel,
Uh-huh.
right? Like what I don't want to feel. And like, that is not frivolous to me. That is like, that is everything. Like
Hmm.
it's this ability to come into the body and to work with what is happening on and in my body. And I, the more and more I talk about this on the podcast, I'm like, guys, like you cannot do this without training it. Right?
Right.
Like you can do somatic meditation alone. Like you should, and you do need to have a personal practice. And I'd love to talk to you about the personal practice, but there's no replacement at all for having a community of other nervous systems to train with.
Oh, absolutely. Just like if you're training for any kind of physical event, right? Like you do so much better if you show up to practice with a coach.
Mhm.
You're going to get so much more training done. But just to kind of share like something that happened recently to show how much I've grown since the trash incident. Um, I was in a meeting last week, and it was one of these meetings that was like something strange was happening. Like there was some guy from another team who wasn't really clear if he was trying to take over my project and like lead my meeting for me, and I was getting pretty frustrated. Um, but during the meeting, like I noticed, like I could feel the frustration building up, and like I was upset, but I was able to be aware of that, and instead of reacting to it, just noticing like, okay, like there's can't let this part of me speak right now because there's a chance I'll say something I'll regret, but was able to just hold that and then make choices on like what to say and how to say it that were actually constructive.
Right.
Um,
Learn actually speaking for the part, not from it.
um, and in this case, the part didn't even need to be spoken for. Like it was okay for that to
Mm.
not be spoken for. Um,
Wow.
the but it allowed me to redirect the meeting where I needed it to go, um, without making it spicy or conflicty.
Right. Or ruining your day.
Hmm.
Yeah. Getting attached to it.
So it's like that kind of stuff. And what's crazy about it is like it's also that's the kind of skill that just got me a recent promotion. So it's like actually not just good for me; it's like also good for my career.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, it's when we say like this work, we're helping ourselves and it helps us connect with everyone and everything. That's the kind of attribution that I see in this work, right? Like the ability to bring that creative project to life, right? That ability to sit with that discomfort and not repress it,
mhm.
like not just put on an egoic mask and fight through it and ruin everybody's day and your environment, at the same time, right? To actually be attuned and to be able to be flexible, right? And to expand, to be with what's happening. And then
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, I'm getting a promotion. Wow, I have executive presence now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, look at that. But I was literally sitting in a sauna with a man yesterday who has been talking to me about this work, and he's like, yeah, he works at LinkedIn, and he's like, and he or no, he works at Stripe, and he says, yeah, it's you know, he's made a comment about having an executive coach or working going on an executive thing, but he was like, he'd never heard of this work, right? And
Mm-hmm.
yet to me it helps us in our professions more than working with an executive coach, because this is the root work. Like, this is the emotional fitness work that allows us, I mean, it's proven.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a bunch of there's two studies that I have right here that say that 80% of work and career success is emotional awareness, not IQ. 20% of
Absolutely.
it is
100%.
intelligence, right?
Yeah, I mean, I work in engineering, and I've done some pretty, um, worked on some pretty big engineering projects. And my view has been for years that the real engineering problems are people problems. Like, the technology is usually solvable, um, but getting
Mm-hmm.
people to work together as a coherent team and solving all of the interpersonal relations, like that's the hardest part. Um, and when you get that right, the technology just takes care of itself. Like it. Um, so the yeah, it like I can point to how my. I mean, I can give like my reactivity and my lack of emotional awareness has literally cost me millions of dollars. Um, and that said, it was it's the path that I'm on is still worth it to get to the point where I am today. Um, because yeah, it's just a much better way to live.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot in those words, man. It's just a much better way to live.
Hmm.
The that subtle joy of being, right? That ability uh, to let go of that fight and to just be in your life as
Hmm.
you are, right? And to then get to show up to things open and receptive, right? Like, that's what I hear in there.
Absolutely. And there's also just the ability to just enjoy life. Like 5 years ago, I couldn't enjoy the beach. I'd go to the beach and I'd sit down and be like, okay, what are we doing? What's next?
Yeah,
Just anxious, right? Like, if I wasn't doing something, I
yeah.
I felt a low grade panic, to be quite honest. And now, like, I can go to the beach, just sit down and watch the waves, and it's just nice. It feels good to just sit there and just be. Um,
And I kind of want to challenge you, Jacob. Like, do you really attribute that to being in an Unshakable Man group, like showing up for, how much do you think you showed up to group, just from a training perspective?
what do you mean? How much? Like,
Like,
percentage?
how often did you like let's make it concrete. Like, how often did you come per week, check in, drop in, slow down, and be in a group with a group of other guys over the past 2 years?
I'd say probably 50% of the weeks over the past 2 years, I've shown up to at least one Unshakable Man thing. I probably more often than that, probably closer to 75%. Um,
Okay. That. I'm really glad I asked you that question, because when you like self-assessed on your own, right? Like
Uh,
it coming in and out, I had a connotation in my head of like, not coming for 3 months or something like
uh-huh,
that. But to be to and so when you state that, is that what I'm seeing from just a critical perspective is just that to me is 1 hour a week of showing up,
hmm
going through one of our check-in groups where you arrive, you do some agreement setting, you ground, check in, and then you're there for an hour with a group of like 5 other guys,
hmm
12 other guys,
Yep.
right? And so you think that you've been to half the weeks, sometimes 75% of them. So like sometimes
Yeah.
3 or 4 times a month and sometimes two.
hmm
Yeah. I mean, can we just talk about that? Like from a, because I kind of want to take the pressure off of you and just have a conversation now for the second half of our thing
hmm
here about the work itself and like the science of what's happening here. Because
So before we
yeah,
go there, can I just finish? Because
yeah,
you asked me if how the work tied into just being able to enjoy the beach,
yes.
and I wanted to finish that thought. It's because this work has been it has been training me to feel more of what's going on in my own body,
Hmm.
and the doing uh, is a distraction from things like the anxiety and the panic. Right? It's a way to like escape from those feelings, and like as I've been feeling that and processing that and getting in touch with peaceful states through this work, like it actually feels good to just sit in my body and just be at peace. Like I don't need to do something to escape from what's going on inside.
And when you come into your body, right, no matter what, there are no good or bad emotions. There's only constructive or destructive responses, right? So when you're training yourself to come into the body and to be with the anxieties at first,
hmm
now when you're on the beach, you are training yourself to be with the subtle joy of being. These things like just joy or eroticism, or like to savor, to
hmm
feel the sand on your skin, right? And this is what this is what I'm like on a mission to get guys to
hmm
recognize, right? Is that the only way we can connect with the experience of our life is through our body.
Right.
We cannot do it. A disembodied thought is not felt in the
Right.
body, right?
And
And
to take that
we
one
don't
step,
even know it.
oh, yeah, and to take that one step further, now, even if something is like one of the more like let's say unpleasant emotions, right? I
Mhm.
don't
I love that. Unpleasant.
I don't feel the need to like escape it. Like I still want to
Mhm.
sit with it, right?
What makes you want to sit with it?
Well, from a purely pragmatic point of view, if I don't sit with it now, it'll pop up later. So there's that. Um,
Yeah.
there's like it's could be telling me something, could be sending me a message.
Yeah.
Um, it's also just better than feeling nothing at all, right? Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Dude, I
it's part of being alive, right? It's like, oh, that's okay, that's intense. Like let's feel that. And
yes.
if I don't get caught in the story, like it doesn't last that long either. So just feel it. And then sometimes it doesn't need an explanation. You just feel it and then kind of goes away after a while and move on to something else.
Yeah. I love how you're the way I'm even moving my body like from side to side when I say it, because it's I just feel it and then I move on to something else. And that there's this very special thing that I think happens when we do this work that I notice, and that it's that we end up intuitively having our own words to describe like our inner experience, but those words are all very similar to others, right? Like we're all just we have this map that we're giving guys, but then the territory, you have to walk that territory yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? I can like we can teach you how to do a check-in, right? And we can talk about formative language and weasel words and emotional vocabulary and the 8 components of emotional fitness, right? Like we can talk about all these concepts, but then when you get into the group, the sensations happening on and in your body are yours.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not making you feel that. When I do something, you feel something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not how it is in our life outside of that, in our default life. We don't have that brave space with structure. So we are kind of like pushing the experience of our life away in so many different environments, so many different things. And I really identify with that same flowing quality to my life of um, getting out of the story, like in nourishing, vibrant, uh, joyful, ecstatic ways. Like just walking out the door, going to get my favorite burrito, and just feeling this upwelling of energy, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
being in my body, and then having something come into my space. And when it comes into my space, noticing the texture shifts, right? Like this,
Mm-hmm.
there's a shift or a change. And sometimes I get hooked, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I get hooked, right? And I get pulled into a story. And but now that I've identified with this subtle joy of being, right, with this softer space, which is out of the head, below the shoulders, down in the body, and I've felt it. I've been in relationship with men like you. I'm aware, right? Like we become aware of the quality shift, but you can only feel that. You can't think it.
Right.
It can only be discerned,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Absolutely. And I think as we practice, at least as I've practiced this more in the group, it's it's um, it's been like how do I want to say this? It's becoming just more and more a part of my everyday experience. Where um, I think for the first year, maybe it was something that was like really specific to that time and place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and now, like, I'm bringing it into my workplace and bringing it into my relationships with my friends.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just started dating again and bringing it to that too. Um,
Mm.
so I think the more I show up, and it becomes so much a part of it's becomes more normal for me. It becomes like just getting that permission from the other guys in the group to also show up in that way. I can kind of carry that permission with me into my life and not feel self-conscious about it.
Mm. I can carry that permission out into my life and not feel self-conscious about it.
Hmm.
What does that mean? I can carry
Like
that permission.
there was a there was a part. I mean, there was a time in my life where if I was in an environment where um, emotional awareness and vulnerability was definitely not celebrated. Like a bunch of bros at a locker room, to use an extreme example, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I would I would tend to be more just like try to fit in, right? Just to kind of contort
Mm-hmm.
myself to fit into that space.
Yeah.
And now I feel much more rooted and grounded into this practice, and like I can bring this with me even into that environment. Like I don't
Okay.
take on the I'm not taking on the characteristics and qualities of the people around me necessarily. And part of that is because there's such a big community around this work, it helps me feel more empowered to be who I am. And because I already know that I'm accepted
Mhm.
this way, and I don't need to court that acceptance from people who need me to be a worse version of myself in order to gain that acceptance.
Exactly. Yeah. You're I think you're displaying right now a beautiful example of authenticity versus attachment,
Mm-hmm.
and and the constructive and destructive uh, reasons, right? Which why through this adaptive process we've learned to shield or to exile our authenticity in order to be attached, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've done it for so long as young men that we've come to identify with, like, oh, this is who I am. I have to be this way when I'm around this group of bros, or this. And I like that. I like the word bros as a derogatory term, right? For right, like, I
Mm-hmm.
like it, but I'm a bro, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a lovable, joyful bro. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
and but that word has shifted for me, right? It's changed, and the way that it expresses itself now is very similar to what I see in you, and what you're bringing in is almost this courageous ability to just be open, which is so inviting,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like other guys want, like, they can feel it. They can feel that this guy doesn't need to shift or change who he is, and he can be with me as I
Mm-hmm.
am. And then, my dudes are in my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course there's guys in my life that have left, right? That have drifted away, or I've drifted away from them. But there's less, it's less uh, brittle,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's less like, I can't be here with you guys. And I hear, specifically, you're bringing me into a thing that came from group this week, where one man was working with his, and I want to remind myself right now about confidentiality versus secrecy in our spaces, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and this is a good time to be able to talk about that, right? Like, the space is confidential, but it's not a secret. So I get to share my relationship with what this man shared, but not who he is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he works in the service industry, and he noticed that as he's in group, he's changing how he shows up with his coworkers, and there's like a mourning or a sadness there of being alone, while while almost like having to make a choice of, do I change how I am in order to, like, join them in this trench humor, in this way that they're being, like, from addictive qualities and behaviors to bad behaviors with, like, dating and stuff, and talking
Mm-hmm.
about people. And as I've witnessed him move through this experience, he's become more and more capable. His stretches are all around showing up in that space and coming into his body, being on and in his heart, allowing it to come up on and in his body, and not telling anyone he's doing this,
Mm-hmm.
right? And actually being with these people as they are, and then realizing he doesn't need to be their best friends, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
okay. Like, he's all right. And then coming back and being like, actually, this one person opened up to me, right? And it's like, wow,
Yeah.
like, right? And I I really like, just the ability for you and I to be able to talk about this, to me, is an awakening, right? And I know that that word can be used outside of these spaces and has different meanings to different people. But to me, it's a physical thing. It's not cognitive. It's not religious. It is like an actual deepening and broadening of my emotional awareness, which is my ability to connect with my life, to be more joyful, to be able to be with the people that are in my life, right? As they are, and also have
Yeah.
boundaries.
So yeah, I just kind of want to reflect on that a little bit, because it sounds, and you know, I can relate to that experience in myself. It's this, as I have deepened my own connection to myself, like I don't need the approval of people around me, um, right? So like I can just show up and be myself and allow other people to be as they are. I can even notice areas where, you know, I have compassion for them, that they aren't aware of some of the things that they're doing or feeling, and um, but I don't need, um, yeah, I don't need that validation, and I don't need that for myself. Uh, like I'm okay already the way I am.
Hmm.
I even noticed this earlier as I was explaining something to you, that like there was probably a past version of me that would have been thinking in the back of my head, like, you know, let me say this correctly. What's Chris going to think when I say this?
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to show up and just like explain, this is where I'm at and this is how I feel, and I'm not even seeking your validation right now.
Hmm.
That's huge for me. Um, so
I just got to celebrate that, man. Just got
yeah.
to celebrate. Got to celebrate that when I. That's rad.
um, and it like I think doing that often enough and consistently enough, it becomes magnetic, because people start to recognize, like, oh, like that person's like, they're there's
Fine.
just something about it that's like, this person just isn't, um,
Mm-hmm.
they just have something, they have something together.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
They can feel it.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Dude, thanks for coming in to just share this. And thank you so much for showing up to do this work and to be in this group in this community. It's um it's very special to receive a message from you like a
Mm-hmm.
month ago, right? That was just like, hey man, I want to talk about this. Like and and I have to say, like I feel I feel intrigued by your calmness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like in throughout our talk, right? Of and I've noticed my own excitement like come up
Mm-hmm.
as wanting to like going down like paths, but it's and I attribute it to you and the way you show up in group, right? And the way you show up in spaces and like the actual training you've done. And I think it makes real sense that you're to me that when you said your own assessment of showing up in group, you've actually been in group a lot,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you've been doing this work consistently for to be in there 2 times a month, 3 times a month, 4 times a month. That is that's a big deal, right? That's like a commitment to a practice. And that's what we talk about in this work is
Mm-hmm.
committing to this. Our life is our practice and this practice is our life, right? Like it's like we're and I've seen you in there,
Mm-hmm.
right? And each time you leave group, you get to go back out into your life, have your experience, bring something in, and it's just like drip, 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 like
Yeah,
these changes.
absolutely. I think there's a famous quote from somebody who's like, show me what a man spends his time on and I'll show you what that man's priorities are, or
Mm-hmm.
something along those lines of like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if it it's one of those things that, like, if you really believe it's important, you have to make the time, and over time the results, and growth isn't linear, you know, like sometimes it for me, like it's just I didn't even realize what was happening, and then one day I'm like, holy shit! Like I just had a interaction that was completely the opposite of how I used to interact with that person on that topic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
It's
like
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great. What advice do you have if you were speaking to other guys? What would you say to them? A man that might be listening to this later, or a man who might have just found out about this, maybe from his friend named Carly.
hmm Um, well, I would say the honestly the advice I would give is start a personal practice of meditation. It really starts with becoming aware of what's going on in your own body, and then just show up to these groups. Like make the time, and if you um, even if you only do it, let's say like once a month, right? It's still better
Mm-hmm.
than nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But the more you uh, like, just trust the process,
Mm-hmm.
um, and life will get a lot better.
Mm.
Um,
And what is the process?
the process is the process is showing up. The process is personal practice
Yep.
and practice in groups.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
the the practice um, the experience of being in the groups is, it's um, it's just something you just can't do on your own. And then
Yeah.
at some point, I highly recommend doing a cohort. I had a really a, one major sort of quantum leap of growth I had was toward the end of the second cohort, when I realized I hadn't been taking up time for myself, and I was like, I paid all this money, and it was the final like motivation that got me to just like speak up and share for myself. And so yeah, I think that having that skin in the game also just helped me feel entitled to get my own time. Um,
Hmm. Can
and
I can I say something about that in
yeah.
relationship to the locker room?
hmm
Like, I paid all this money. Like, there's this like, and there's like you went like this, your body, right? And
hmm
you and taking up space. And I think that we what I see in this work and I see in you is like when we learn to go in and to work with these things that are happening on or in our body, this is our emotional residue, right? Like
hmm
this is the stuff that's stuck in us, in our bodies, from our adaptive survival, whatever we went through, and that's ours to take responsibility for. But there's almost sometimes like a tendency to collapse in there, right? Like as I have my personal practice, and this is one of the reasons why I think it's so important to have a group and to be in a group and to be in your own personal practice, is because we see ourselves, our relationship with our personal practice through the group, right? We
hmm
see other men in the group taking up more space than us, and that inspires us to like take up some space, right? And if you've ever meditated for 30 days in a row for an hour a day, the same thing happens in our own personal practice. Like that we have to, the structure is so important. If we get too rigid and we're forcing ourselves to show up and to sit there, we're supposed to be relaxing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then we notice like how we're treating our body, right? We're not allowing our body to smile, right? Like there's something what we're getting like caught in, right? That beautiful monster, that pain bubble in there, right? And so when I see you talk about a personal practice and showing up and like coming out of a cohort, right? You like weren't in a cohort. You did a cohort and then you were just showing up in the groups, and then your biggest opening was at the end of the second one, and you're like seeing yourself, right? And you step in and take up some space. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
like that whole pendulum swing of the elasticity, right? The like being, when we talk about being an unshakable man, it's like we have rigid masculinity, and this is about being flexible, right? It's about being able to expand, to be able to take up space in an open-hearted, caring, compassionate way. And that's literally what I see you doing when you
Yeah.
say that,
No,
right?
exactly. And just to kind of continue with this thought of taking up space, it's uh, for me, it's almost been like a barometer of how um, connected I am with myself, to where I feel enough self acceptance and enough self love to um, to feel empowered to take up that space.
Mhm.
Um, and I think in the past, when I felt a little shy, or felt like
Mhm.
these other men have something that's more important to share, or something like that, right? Like that was
Uh-huh.
an indicator to me of how I felt about myself. Um,
Exactly.
and I could meditate all day long for a year in a row and still not necessarily feel empowered to take up space in a group of people, or a group of men. And
Exactly.
um, I think that's been a big one of the biggest shifts for me, actually, is as a result of this work, is like, yeah, like my feelings are valid too. uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, I'm taking up some space right here. I'm
Yeah.
not crowding somebody out, but also just not being crowded out, like not taking
Mhm.
myself out.
Yeah. Yeah. When what and which is such a gift to whoever you end up in a relationship with, right?
Hmm.
Whoever that person is, they get to receive, you will show up in that, you will have some awareness of when you're not showing up, right? Because we shrink, we hide, right? We
Hmm.
exile parts. We don't know how to speak for parts all the time, right? It happens to me. But having an awareness of that, to me, mitigates the eruptions, right?
Hmm.
Or the blame of, you made me feel, or you need to do XYZ, right? Where we're making it about them and not being able to be the primary caretaker for our parts so they can be
Hmm.
the secondary,
Right.
right? And you're just, yeah, it's beautiful, man. Thank you so much, man. Thank you so much, Jacob.
Yeah, thank you for creating this community, and supporting it, and organizing it, and making a yeah, just a great space for us to come in and do this work. Like, wouldn't have happened without you. So I really appreciate your commitment to this.
Received and back at you. I do want to make one other connection about the personal practice, the
Hmm.
meditation thing, before we go. Um, I think that this is one of the things um, that is like lost on a deeper level with meditation, of this connotation of like the lone wolf, right? Or like I can, um, like meditation can be a thing to escape our life too,
Right.
right? Where we are, and there's this, there it we're not, these things don't exist alone. They exist in relationship to our entire Shyla, right? And the
Hmm.
word Shyla is not a word that we have in the English language, and it's a word that defines in Tibetan Buddhism, which means the entire landscape of your practice,
Hmm.
right? It's everything from how you drink the tea, right? Like I noticed earlier, I was like rushing to take a sip with you to not have it here, right? To how I am with you in this moment, to running to get to yoga this morning, right? To
Hmm.
how I related to the yoga teacher and her practice, and how, right? Like any stories I had, right? It's the whole thing,
Hmm.
and it's
Absolutely.
all the choices we make. And when we're on that path, I think initially with a lot of men in with meditation, first of all, are you meditating with a somatic practice where you're coming into the body, and the body is allowing the body to smile and using the body as a vessel to connect with the experience of your life? Or are you coming up into the head and trying to not think, right?
Hmm.
Like trying to be present, which creates tension, right? So
Hmm.
you're like coming into this body and then appreciating that we don't, for many of us, we get into that in order to feel good, right? Like we get marketed to meditate, to be more
Hmm.
productive, to feel good, right? To be like in a state of flow, to produce more in our like society here, when this work for us is not about feeling good. It's about learning to become whole, right?
Hmm.
Like your everything you've embodied in this conversation today for me is about learning to be with what is your experience, right? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think what I'm hearing there is like meditation is practice. Thich
mhm,
Nhat Hanh says this, right? Like, the point of meditation isn't the meditation. The point of meditation is
mhm,
to bring what you learn in meditation to the rest of your life. You
mhm,
should you should never not be um,
meditating.
right. And
Yeah.
so it's a practice of being in connection with the self, being in connection with the somatic experience, so that throughout our day we can check in with ourselves, see how we're feeling, um, and there was something, yeah, and just another little point, kind of a side note on the whole not thinking. Like, my favorite visualization is thinking of the brain as just an organ that secretes thoughts, like an organ secretes
Hmm.
hormones,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a battery, right? It's a
and just noticing, just observe, like allow it
computer.
to think, as as long as you can just sit back and observe it, and being
Yeah.
connected with the full physical experience, right? There's like a brain secreting thoughts, there's all these things going on here, and being in touch with
Hmm.
the whole thing all at once. That's really the power of meditation. Um, but it's a practice. It's like, eating your vegetables and doing a workout. Like, you don't do the workout unless you're a professional athlete. You're not doing the workout for the sake of doing the workout, right? Like, you're doing it to bring those health benefits to the rest of your life.
Yeah. And even the professional athlete, I would say. So,
Yeah.
but and then one thing that you brought in there on to continue our yo-yoing is as you have your practice, every all of these practices that we're learning from were performed in a sangha, right? They were performed in a community. They were performed where you would get to come and talk about, share your inner experience, and learn to relate what was happening on and in your body to another person who was practicing. And that's what I see us doing in the Unshakable Man, is when we're learning to like after every grounding, we just have like a 10-minute grounding where we come into the body and do a somatic meditation. That's why I always ask, like, did anyone like to share what your experience was like as we did that? Because when we get to witness and to receive a man's share of what his inner experience is like, we get to pick up little pieces, right? Of like, oh,
Mhm.
like he described the sensations in his belly as bright, right? Or he gave it a color, or there was a texture, and it's like, oh, that's all emotional vocabulary, right? And emotional granularity and attunement that helps me to become, to have more building blocks.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of dancing. Like I've been doing a lot of ecstatic dance lately, and so I'll be like dancing around doing something that like I think feels good, and then I'll see somebody else do something, and sometimes I'm like, oh, like that looks fun, and then I'll try that.
Yeah.
But it's like if I were just to do this all by myself, I would stay really limited to like a narrow range of expression. But as I kind of receive all these different forms of expression around me, it like enriches what I'm able to do and what I have access to. So, and again, brings more awareness, right? It's like, I never thought of it that way, but if I, you know, feel into that, like, oh yeah, interesting. Like it
Hmm.
just, it
Hmm.
increases um, it increases uh, just the richness of the experience.
Hmm. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here, man. Thank you for coming onto the show. And is there anything you want to say or share to feel complete?
I think I feel pretty complete. Yeah, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you having me on here.
Thank you, Jacob. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Do you mind if I just do a closing here for any man who might be listening?
Let's do it.
All right. Hey guys, this was a conversation with me and Jacob, and I just from the bottom of my heart, or maybe I should say my gut, I hope if you've listened to this conversation, you get the courage and you feel inspired to take that first step, maybe to just come to a group, to sign up for a cohort. Because I think one of the things that I find in having these conversations is that all of these conversations really just point to an experience. And Jacob, here, you've had an experience, I've had an experience, but all we can do is put these signposts that are like, hey, come give this a try, feel it for yourself, and see if this is something that's worthy of becoming something that integrates into your life as a practice. So, with that being said, thank you so much for listening. Thanks for taking an hour out of your day, out of your life to listen to this. And Jacob, thank you for showing up to share your story, because I really do believe and see that the only way men find their way to this work is by seeing other men, right? The examples of other men do this. And so, thank you.